three of our panel members here. So tech team, if you can help me, kindly bring up Ms. Gertrude Kohn, Mr. Abdul-Hakeem Ajijola, and Hilda Barasa. So if you are here, kindly, yes, I see Ms. Kohn. Do we have Hilda here? And then we can go on. You can please unmute and say if you're here so that we go on right into the conversation. Right, so Akwaba from Accra, Ghana, as I said. Today we'll be discussing something very interesting. And like Folaka said, in the same light, we are moving the conversation from digital economy straight to emerging technologies. We all know of the trending discussions around the industrial revolutions, and currently very trendy is the fourth industrial revolution, where we are looking at the power of cloud, social media, AI, and many more emerging technologies. In this session, we want to go deeper into the conversation to look at the insights and see how our countries in the sub-region in West Africa are prepared to use these technologies. So if you're going to start straight away with a conversation, and we'll have the moderated one starting first with different interventions coming in, then we'll move to the point where everyone is able to ask questions around this topic. If you're excited as I am, get ready and let's get started. So we have Ms. Gertrude Kohn, and I'll read something about her and also about all the speakers on this panel, and then they can have the floor to speak with their very first intervention. So Ms. Gertrude Kohn is the Executive Director for UNETEL, which is the Association of MNOs in Cote d'Ivoire. The main mission of her organization is to defend the interests of its members and to promote the development of the digital economy. We also have Mr. Abdul-Hakeem Ajijola, who is a cybersecurity resource ranked #1 in IFSCE 2020 Global Cybersecurity Professionals. And he's a thought leader and works around many areas in cybersecurity policy and also about the strategy in cybersecurity. We also have Madame Hilda Barasa, who works with the Tony Blair Institute and as a public policy specialist with extensive experience working with government, the public sector agencies, and the private sector to deliver sector-wide legislative and policy reforms. So you're welcome everyone to our speakers. Some will speak in English, others will speak in French. So kindly note this and do toggle the language button so that you can listen and participate fully. So our very first question, we've heard about what's happening in the world of emerging technologies. The conversation has been ongoing around the world, and it's of importance to our sub-region also. So our very first intervention will be started off for us by Ms. Gertrude Kohn, and she's going to be answering the question about her work in the space and the readiness of countries to address the challenges of rights, data, infrastructure, related to the new emerging technologies. So Madame Kohn, can you tell us about the work you do in this space and how you're working to address challenges of rights and data and infrastructure, especially in this very new space that we are finding ourselves and how fast evolving it is?
Okay. Merci beaucoup. Je voudrais commencer par préciser que je m'appelle Gertrude Kohn et que je représente l'UNETEL, qui est l'association des Mobile Network Operators en Côte d'Ivoire. Alors, comment la Côte d'Ivoire se prépare aux nouvelles technologies? Il faut dire qu'ici, en Côte d'Ivoire, nous utilisons déjà la 4G, mais nous avons constaté la technologie 4G disponible, mais nous constatons que les usages sont encore focus sur la 2G et la 3G. On a environ 80% des usages qui sont en 2G et en 3G. Également, ce que nous constatons, c'est qu'il y a des niveaux vraiment très différents d'appropriation du numérique. Qu'est-ce à dire? Les grandes entreprises sont bien avancées en matière de transformation digitale. Les grandes entreprises, ce sont les filiales des multinationales ou les grandes entreprises locales. Et il y a un vaste tissu de PME, environ 80% des entreprises qui sont encore en train de s'équiper, donc qui sont encore au premier pas de la digitalisation et qui n'ont pas d'installation d'équipement, mais qui n'ont pas encore franchi le cap de la transformation digitale. Alors, nous, au niveau de la Commission économie numérique, ce que nous faisons, c'est sensibiliser les entreprises, leur montrer les voies et moyens pour transformer la culture digitale déjà dans leur entreprise, également comment s'approprier le digital en termes d'outils, quels sont les outils qu'il leur faut, comment y aller. Et je veux dire que nous avons enregistré pas mal de succès puisque les entreprises qui sont réunies au sein du patronat ivoirien, qui est la plus grande association d'entreprises du secteur privé, au niveau de cette commission-là, nous avons réussi à sensibiliser les entreprises qui ont résolument franchi le cap. Avec le Covid, il est vrai que les choses sont allées encore plus vite et que la demande est extrême. Est-ce que nous... Également, ce qu'il faut savoir en Côte d'Ivoire ici, c'est que les opérateurs de téléphonie mobile, ils sont très actifs au niveau de l'innovation. C'est eux qui impulsent la dynamique en matière d'innovation. C'est eux qui mettent en place un framework pour aider tout l'écosystème à promouvoir des services numériques, à créer de nombreux services numériques. Également, ce qu'il faut savoir, c'est que nous avons un vaste champ d'opportunités pour tous ceux qui voudraient venir faire du digital en Côte d'Ivoire, mais encore plus le cadre légal est relativement bon. Le cadre légal est relativement bon, même s'il est vrai qu'avec les avancées, vous savez qu'avec les nouvelles technologies, les nouveaux usages, le cadre légal qu'on met en place est très vite obsolète. Donc, il faut arriver à montrer une certaine réactivité pour adapter ce cadre légal et réglementaire. L'explosion de la finance, des services financiers mobiles qui a été rendue possible grâce aux télécoms est également un bon pas pour nous. Ça a amené les populations à s'approprier encore plus vite le digital. Aujourd'hui, même si la fracture numérique elle est très sensible entre les grandes villes et les petites villes les petites villes de l'intérieur du pays, il est clair que de plus en plus, les populations sont passionnées, les populations sont impliquées, les populations consomment des services numériques. Et ça, c'est une réelle opportunité pour toutes ces technologies qui vont arriver et donc qui vont trouver preneur. Maintenant, la question est, est-ce que nous avons pu définir, est-ce que nous aurons le temps de définir tous ces besoins-là et les faire matcher avec les opportunités offertes par les nouvelles technologies? Donc, c'est sur ce point-là que je pense que nous devons nous atteler à cela. Par rapport à la 5G qui sera nécessaire pour les nouvelles technologies, également, jusqu'à présent, même s'il y a une réelle volonté de pouvoir lancer rapidement la 5G, on a dit 2023, le gouvernement parle de 2022. Bref, une chose est sûre, à ce jour, les tests n'ont pas encore réellement démarré. Mais pour ce faire, il faut quand même mettre en place des protocoles. Il faut libérer de la bande passante, il faut libérer des fréquences. Il faut déjà prévoir la législation pour adresser les problématiques qui seront liées à l'utilisation de la technologie 5G. Et cela, on ne l'a pas encore fait. Donc, en résumé, en Côte d'Ivoire, oui, nous avons déjà le cadre légal, nous avons le cadre institutionnel, nous avons déjà des technologies qui sont encore sous-utilisées. Alors, faut-il franchir le pas avec tout ce qui est IoT, tout ce qui est intelligence artificielle, tout ce qui est blockchain, alors que jusqu'à présent, nous ne nous sommes pas encore appropriés réellement toutes ces technologies-là. Donc, voilà ce que je peux dire sur l'état des lieux en Côte d'Ivoire.
Right, merci beaucoup. Thank you so much. I jumped onto the English part to listen to you. And it's very interesting all that you've mentioned. You mentioned how the demand for digital transformation has increased in Cote d'Ivoire, even especially in the wake of the coronavirus, and how operators are actually pushing for the dynamism of the space. And very importantly, I like that you mentioned about the legalities when it comes to the space, and also regarding the issue of coverage. Many people are using new things that are in the updates that are in the space, but how many people are able to access it and for what purposes? In the same light, we want to go to Dr. or Alaji, who is speaking next, and he's going to also tell us about the challenges in the space, especially because technology is fast evolving and it goes way faster than the policies that are being developed and whatnot. So I want to ask you, sir, what are some of the challenges with regards data, rights and whatnot in the space you work in, and what are some of the recommendations you can have for our sub-region?
Okay. I hope you can see my screen, Lilia and colleagues. No?
Not yet. Would you want access to?
Not yet. Okay, hold on. Let's try again.
Right.
Oh, dear. Ahead without it. One last time. Okay. Thank you very much. I'm going to talk about some emerging technologies from a security point of view. In Nigeria, we have, in 2015, we passed the National Cybercrime Act, 2015. We also endorsed a national cybersecurity policy and strategy, and that policy and strategy was revised and renewed in 2021, this year. We also have, in 2019, our data protection regulation, and we expect the Data Protection Act to be signed into law sometime. Finally, we are also putting in place an institutional mechanism called the National Cybersecurity Coordination Center. As of now, all the individual regulators are going to have a major role.
Did we lose you?
If we can. Clearly is quite broad. It talks, we look at the law, crime, security of things, even war, privacy, infrastructure, but very importantly, human rights, human action, human agency. I think these are very important issues that we must not forget. Now, the cybersecurity threat space also can be quite complicated, from authentication privilege to security of physical systems to social engineering issues, issues within our value chains, and then the geopolitical issues that arise, and we'll try and touch on some of them, and malicious content. So it's quite complex, and there are all kinds of risks under every rock, so to speak. Now, in terms of some of the envisaged emerging disruptions and arguably cybersecurity threats, for example, Elon Musk of SpaceX, or some of you know him from Tesla, Jeff Bezos, some of you know him from Amazon, has started Project Juniper, and also OneWeb in the UK. They are building microsatellite constellations, and basically, in the case of SpaceX, they have over 1,000 in space right now, microsatellites, and they plan to hit 12,000 sometime next year, and the eventual constellation will be in the range of 30,000 microsatellites. Having said that, Project Juniper by Jeff Bezos, in fact, this is the reason that he has stepped down from Amazon to focus on his space endeavors, is looking at about 640, I think, no, about 3,600 satellites, while OneWeb is looking at about 648. Now, the point is, in the case of Starlink, they are looking at dropping the price of bandwidth by anywhere from in the range of 150,000%. Now, if a country like Nigeria has spent $350 million putting up a satellite, and the primary purpose of that satellite is to provide bandwidth, then one might argue that that investment might be, well, not very useful. However, of course, a much lower price is excellent for the consumer. It is also excellent for the prospect of new and innovative technologies, but it does raise issues. Who controls this? Of course, Starlink answers to its shareholders and answers to the regulators in the US primarily. Which means that potentially it can undermine our sovereignty. Once your personal data hits a foreign satellite, can you guarantee that it's still personal, that it won't be shared, that somebody will not make a copy? So there are these kind of issues that we have to be concerned about and have conversations about. The second challenge is the value chain. We've seen a situation in 2020 where a series of smartphones had malware embedded during the production process. And these cheap, low-cost smartphones are generally used by people a little lower down the socioeconomic ladder, which means that bandwidth is disproportionately expensive for them. And so the insult in this immediate instance was that their data was being stolen by these phones using their expensive bandwidth, which they were paying for. So they were paying for their data to be stolen, which is not very good. And then we're now seeing the evolution of digital currency. This is a natural evolution. There's not much we're going to do about it. We just have to find a way to handle it. But let me give you a couple of examples. One, we've all heard about Bitcoin. Bitcoin is peer-to-peer. It has no center. It has no quote-unquote owner, and therefore there is nothing to control. This undermines your regulators. We've seen Facebook. They tried initially with Libra, digital currency. They are now starting up something called DM, and that's part of the reason we've seen Facebook try to strengthen the backends of WhatsApp and Instagram with the new licensing regimes that have been causing some challenges across the world, especially in Africa. Again, Facebook is a private company. It answers to its shareholders first and foremost. Secondly, it answers to US regulators. So African regulators are going to struggle to have some say in this process. The third example is the Chinese yuan, and that's a national digital currency. Again, bear in mind, China is a sovereign state. Our regulators have no control over them. And indeed, in the Chinese case, we have to bear in mind as Africans that first and foremost, 50% of the handsets in Africa basically are from China. But more importantly, 70% of that's 70 of the digital infrastructure is actually Chinese. So they have a natural advantage. And indeed, the new Huawei smartphone 40 that was launched in South Africa in 2020, in October 2020, has an encrypted digital wallet as a chip in the phone. So of course it makes it easy, but it means, again, the African regulators have very, very little control. I am happy to say that at least in the case of Nigeria is planning a pilot project for a digital currency, hopefully before the end of this year. However, I am concerned personally because I think we are thinking too small. We have a historic opportunity with the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. That agreement needs to be facilitated. It needs its own currency. So I would advocate, and I would ask you to join in that advocacy, continental African digital currency, so that let our central banks come together and produce African wallets that conform to our perspectives and set standards for us, by us. Then we also have seen in the case of the Cambridge Analytica, it's happened in, well, they admitted, or their former staff admitted to the UK Parliament that Cambridge Analytica did interfere in both the elections, presidential elections in Nigeria and also in Kenya. So we're not talking theory here. These things have happened. And then finally, on this particular or these areas of concern, we've seen where the US, for example, has tried to pressurize Huawei in order to basically, for commercial reasons. We've seen where the same US has tried to force the Chinese owners of TikTok to sell shares to US companies. But we've also seen situations where countries like India have banned 118, this was in late 2020, 118 apps for national security reasons. So this is of great concern, and I think these are the kind of challenges, issues we need to be careful about. So what do we do? Well, again, I think the bottom line is no one can make Africa work unless Africans themselves make it work. And so there are three basic aspects to the solution tripod. First and foremost is about people. We have to build our human resources. We have to build our awareness. We have to build our capacity. I would argue that Africa must overbuild. And the reason is that as of 2020, the IST Squared consortium had done a survey and come to the conclusion that there was a deficit of 3.1 million cybersecurity experts. So I think it is time, if our young people must be quote unquote exported, rather than crossing the desert, rather than dying in the desert, rather than dying in the Mediterranean, why can't we have them educated so that they are in demand, so that when they even are flown there business class, they will be respected, they will be a diaspora that we can be proud of, they will have positions of power, and yes, they will send home remittances. But more importantly than the remittances is that over the long run, those same diaspora will come back not only with their technology savvy and experience, but with the relationships that bring financing. If you or I, as Africans or West Africans, write a letter to some investment company in Europe or America with a great idea, I mean, who are we? They probably think we are some prince stranded in space, especially if you're a Nigerian. Why not? But if I've worked with them in their offices in their country, they are more likely to listen to me. Of course, we have to look at the processes. We need to participate in the development of global cyber norms. Norms are soft laws, and eventually, as we've seen in nuclear, in arms proliferation, in space, in biotechnology, these norms have progressed over the years to become hard international law. So we must develop a generation of African cyber diplomats. And of course, the technology is imperative. We need to be able to develop and implement the requisite infrastructure. Infrastructure is key. So we must also build proficiency in monitoring and navigating these global economic challenges, like I've said, especially around the fragmentation, because these connectivity relationships increase our cost, increase our difficulties if they are not managed carefully. Another big issue that we must address in our way forward is our women. No society, no country is going to go anywhere in this day and age without 50% of its population. In addition to us missing 50% of the population, which are our women, we also undermine another 47%, which are our male youth. And so I think it's important that we begin to look at how best to harness our population. These are examples of some women across Africa who are doing great things, and I would encourage our sisters in the audience to please encourage other sisters to move forward, because the opportunities are there. And indeed, the beauty of cyberspace is that even if you come from a culturally conservative environment, you can work from home. If there is a pandemic and your family doesn't want you to go out, you can work from home. This is the beauty of cyberspace and the internet. So the question I ask myself and I will put to the audience, who will protect the digital African? If not you and I, then whom? We must look at cyber norms. Maybe one of you in the audience can at some point be inspired to become an African cyber diplomat. We must build our national, regional, and continental capacities. And I would ask you to all open your minds. There are great new areas. I have mentioned cyber diplomacy. Based on our data privacy regulations, there are new privacy compliance functions. Predictive analytics, because of big data, is a new one. But even in the military, we are seeing mosaic warfare and mimetic warfare. And very, very importantly, in fact, most importantly, I would urge each and every one of you, please always factor in your policy strategies and moving forward the underserved, the unserved, and the unborn. They are not at the table, yet we must factor them in our thinking because they have to live with the consequences of what we do today. Thank you very much. I'm very grateful.
Thank you so much, sir. Indeed, no one can make Africa great or Africa work except Africans themselves. Thank you for mentioning more on legalities, mentioning about geopolitical issues, to malware, straight to the free trade agreement, and then putting humans at the center of technologies, building for and with human beings. And very interesting points you mentioned with regards questions that we should ponder on. So who is going to protect Cyber Africa? In the chat on social media, tell us what your plans are. For the young people he's mentioned, for the women who are gearing up to take up the space, and for us who are also already discussing in the space. And some questions I'll have for you, but will come later on. I'll list them, especially with regards control, sustainability, and building capacity to move Africans from just being consumers to actually innovating. Very interesting points mentioned there. And thank you for your submission. We get to you once more soon. Now, we are going on to Madame Hilda Barasa, who works with the Tony Blair Institute and situated currently in Accra. And she also is going to tell us about the work they're doing in the space across regions in this sub-region, and trying to let us know how we are going up to work on some of these challenges that have been identified, especially because technology and emerging technologies in particular are a natural extension of our offline world. So Madame Hilda Barasa, the floor is yours and welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lily. I think it's a pleasure for me to be able to join you this morning, and also just the other esteemed panelists. I think it's important to just kickstart this by saying across the continent, I think digital transformation was already happening, and this, whether it differs within and between countries, but it was already happening. And I think pre-COVID, you had quite a number of African governments kickstarting their digital transformation processes by deploying specific technologies, and all of these were sort of aimed at improving the ability to deliver services and spur economic activity. And by and large, the success of these initiatives was, and to an extent still is, quite dependent on a government's ability to reorganize its internal structures to capture and to manage citizens' data appropriately, and to deploy the right digital systems to improve its functions. So at the Tony Blair Institute, we approach work within the digital space within I guess almost like three buckets of thinking across three principles. So we think about how governments need to be at the forefront of radical and technologically ambitious reform. And this has to be informed by three principles that we reflect on, and we actually develop our interventions and our work in the sectors based on these three particular principles. The first of those principles is purposeful governance. I think we've rightly mentioned that technology is evolving, and the public sector doesn't need to be at the forefront of setting an agenda for the nations and the government, and to update the policy levers within this particular framework to help and support the people who are innovating within within the tech revolution. So this is, it's as simple as, sometimes creating sort of like a regulatory sandbox for different national mission and formalizing and fast tracking legislative processes. So they have to be at the forefront rather than playing catch up on issues of governance. And then we also think about enabling infrastructure. What are the software and data infrastructure that are necessary for companies and nonprofits and other public sector agencies that are needed for them to effectively respond to the opportunities and challenges of the modern era? So we think about issues of starting with developing decentralized electronic or digital ID systems that now public and private sector actors can actually layer their services to citizens within a digital ID platform. Thinking about how do you promote platform-based innovation by standardizing or being in favor of publishing and documenting APIs for all new public and private sector services. And we also think that the governments themselves need to be able to change how they work so that they have a more responsive institution. So you break through the silos and reduce the interdependencies within the public sector agencies to enable a more effective and quicker delivery of public policy and services. So an example of this would be to have a central digital data and technology function that is able to incorporate the existing digital government units and that would be responsible for technology policy. So when you think about the challenges that Africa, for example, faces on issues of digital government transformation, there's quite a number of challenges that are common across board. They're not endemic to West Africa per se. One of them, and I'm quite glad that Abdul spoke about this. When you think about data protection laws, and this is something that is not just a concern for Africa, but is a concern globally. But within Africa, when you think about having fit for purpose data protection and privacy laws that are very much suitable to the dynamics of the digital economy or market. So if we, across board, there, I cannot say that there are appropriate data protection laws that have been designed for the digital economy market. So if you think of issues like, data governance frameworks, and think of the Africa free trade continental area that is going to create one marketplace, and part of that will be driven by the digital area. We need to be at the forefront of developing suitable data protection laws for this. And I think, with the exception of Benin here in West Africa, there aren't comprehensive data protection laws that allow for issues like data portability, accountability measures, etc. So those are some of the things that we really need to be able to think about. We also need to think about how do you increase investments in both hard infrastructure and soft infrastructure. So similar to the Cote d'Ivoire example of expanding use of broadband internet and mobile technology, these digital infrastructures are going to be the foundational pillars for digital transformation across the continent. And we have to think more in line with cross-border digital infrastructure development and how you can prioritize this through harmonization of regulatory instruments and even having cross-border financing for this kind of infrastructure development. We think of like the huge numbers that are attached to this across the whole continent needs approximately 100 billion in investments for key ICT infrastructure. And this is something that is included in the AU 2063 agenda. And when we're not able to put significant investments in building these infrastructures, we actually risk the implementation of game changer initiatives like the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. And I think that we also need to think through how we can invest in leveraging emerging technologies like AI to be able to tackle, African social challenges. So, the work that Google's AI Research Center in Africa, for example, is doing, that is looking at how AI can be used to improve healthcare by, automating the diagnosis of diseases is something, it's something that is quite interesting, and also how can you create sort of like or rather improve communication across the continent by digitizing different languages. But also when we look at the education sector, for example, which has undergone quite a lot of disruption due to COVID, the ability to leverage technology to actually deliver quality education for all, to be able to connect those in the disadvantaged, marginalized areas is an example of how you can actually use and leverage technology to actually improve, I guess, sort of like the quality of life, and more importantly, prepare Africa's children and the youth for the future of work by actually incorporating digital skills and using technology to bring them up to par with the rest of the continent, and by extension, a more globalized employment market. I think the other challenge that I would raise is particularly in how we can improve digital capacity and skills. I think it's common knowledge that the Africa youth will actually, when you think about the future of work, Africa's youth demographically are more, I guess, a position that, we have more youth entering the job market annually than any other country or continent in the world. And we have to be able to use, I think digital skills development, it becomes a prerequisite, not just for digital transformation, but how our youth are able to engage in the future of work. So there are so many different initiatives that are currently being piloted, whether it's the World Bank Digital Economy for Africa initiative, which places quite an emphasis on equipping the continent with digital skills. Mastercard Foundation's program on secondary and tertiary education skills initiative. We have to be able to embed this across all education levels, and not just as a standalone subject, but to really reimagine sort of like the pedagogy of instruction, so that digital skills are embedded in our education systems from the word go. And I think lastly, the other challenge that I'd mention has to do with digital ID systems. At the Institute, we do work quite a bit on digital ID systems. And I think, we've all seen on the back of the vaccine inequity for COVID, the emerging trend for countries to actually require travelers to be able to prove that they have been vaccinated, or to show health passports that are anchored on digital ID systems to be able to access certain venues, for example. In a majority of the global, I guess, sort of like the invisible billion are actually in Africa. And we have so many people who actually don't have basic ID credentials, which really just locks them out from the ability to access public services, social welfare, and I think an increasing range of private sector services that are tied to the need to have that sort of like basic ID credentials. So it's imperative that African governments think more about how they can build good digital ID systems that are actually designed with inclusivity in mind. So we're not we're not leaving behind the majority of the invisible billion that are interoperable and that they have sufficient privacy safeguards. And this I think is really at the heart of digital transformation. So yeah, thank you so much for.
Thank you so much for sharing with us. Very important point also mentioned. I love how the conversation has actually focused on the work in the space, looking at different angles. Now we just moved to the government bit, and you said something that I thought was profound. You said that it is time government should be at the forefront of these engagements and not rather playing the catch-up or the catch-up game. And you mentioned also the principles you work with, highlight the purposeful governance, which has to do with regulatory aspects of things. And it got me thinking where we can draw a line between regulating for security purposes also ensure safety of technologies, and also regulations would also maybe can stifle innovations. We'll get Akin to understand more where we can draw a fine line to make sure that there's innovation going on, even though there are regulations to back them. And also interesting was the infrastructure development, and went on to talk about a very important point that many of the young people here would probably side with you, which is the investment, increased investment in the space. You know, what are people building, what the support available for them, and what not. And also very interesting was the mention of data protection and similar challenges that were echoed also by the past speakers. So thank you for sharing with us, and we'll also pick your intervention on the next topic very soon. So we're moving to the next side of the conversation, and briefly, we'll be looking at how African countries and countries in the sub-region are gearing up to be able to contain these technologies we're speaking about. So right now they seem far-fetched, and I can bet you that maybe in 2020 or in 2019, everything that we're doing online seemed far-fetched for many people until COVID hit and we're forced to adapt, right? So what are the legislations available? What are the work being done in the space? What work is also being done by the institutions we have gathered here, and how are we trying to make emerging technologies a natural extension of our offline world, and also very much seated into what we have and envision as technology. I will take Madam Gertrude's point first, then we'll go to Alaji and also Hilda. So Madam Gertrude, in very few minutes, in 2 minutes, can you tell us what legislation looks like to contain emerging technologies?
Alors, parlant de législation, je suppose qu'il faut parler d'abord, avant tout, des défis à relever. Et ces défis, ils sont nombreux. On n'a pas parlé des défis énergétiques, on n'a pas parlé des défis, des défis en matière d'équipement et tout. Mais si on reste focus sur la réglementation, déjà, il faut faire connaître les lois qui existent aux populations et aux entreprises également. Il faut les faire connaître. Et c'est difficile, c'est difficile de pouvoir apporter quelque chose de nouveau, de faire en sorte que tout le monde s'approprie les nouvelles technologies. Si on ne connaît pas les règles du jeu, on ne sait pas, par exemple, la loi sur la protection des données à caractère personnel, data privacy, on ne la connaît pas et c'est difficile. C'est difficile avec cette loi. Les entreprises ne savent pas comment l'utiliser, ne savent même pas qu'elle existe, à plus forte raison, comment l'utiliser, les populations ici. Oui, nous devons avoir de nouvelles lois, des lois portant sur l'utilisation de l'intelligence artificielle, sur l'utilisation de la blockchain, sur toutes ces nouvelles technologies, même sur l'IoT, mais aujourd'hui, il faut avant de pouvoir les mettre en œuvre, d'abord, il faut penser à comment éduquer nos populations. Il faut d'abord les éduquer. Oui, votons ces lois, mais allons les éduquer. Allons éduquer les populations, les entreprises avant tout. Également, ce que je voudrais dire, c'est que la coopération régionale, sous-régionale, elle existe déjà, mais elle n'est pas, il y a des textes, mais que les pays ne mettent pas en œuvre. Si je prends le cas simple, le premier cas qui me vient à l'esprit, c'est le cas sur les fréquences. les fréquences transfrontalières, il y a des agréments qui sont, il y a des législations qui existent entre les pays, mais la plupart des pays ne les appliquent pas. Alors aujourd'hui, nous allons nous retrouver avec d'autres législations intercommunautaires, des législations régionales, mais ceux qui existent déjà, on ne les applique pas. Alors, est-ce qu'on pense que, qu'est-ce qu'il faut faire pour que les pays tiennent leurs engagements? Il faudrait que chaque pays se donne vraiment pour leitmotiv qu'il faut respecter ses engagements. Et c'est dommage parce qu'en Afrique, dans malheureusement beaucoup de pays, comme j'ai pu le constater, le respect des engagements pris n'est pas la première chose qu'on met en avant. Oui, il faut la coopération pour implémenter cette législation, parce qu'il faut de nouvelles lois pour qu'on puisse mieux s'approprier les bénéfices de ces technologies. Il faut la coopération, il faut également l'éducation des populations. Et puis, je dirais également qu'en termes de loi, il faut que les pays mettent en œuvre des lois qui facilitent l'acquisition des équipements, parce que ça reste un gros frein à l'adoption des nouvelles technologies. La fiscalité, ce n'est pas une fiscalité de développement, c'est une fiscalité qui est là pour capter les ressources, on collecte juste les ressources, mais derrière, on ne cherche pas réellement avec la fiscalité à développer l'Internet, à développer les nouvelles technologies. Non, il faut une fiscalité de développement, ce qui veut dire quoi? Par exemple, mettre en place tout ce qu'il y a comme exonération pour acheter les équipements. Il faut mettre en place des mécanismes pour améliorer la capacité de réinvestissement des opérateurs dans le développement des infrastructures, par exemple. Donc, il y a beaucoup de choses à faire, mais si on reste dans les anciens paradigmes, c'est-à-dire les anciennes manières de penser, et non de penser fiscalité de développement, et non penser régulation, des lois qui concernent directement la protection des droits du citoyen, la protection des libertés individuelles, il est clair qu'on va droit dans le mur. Changeons de manière de penser, regardons un peu comment faire, mettons en avant l'intérêt du citoyen et on verra que les lois que nous allons mettre en œuvre, elles seront elles vont aller droit vers les attentes, les besoins des populations et des entreprises. Voilà ce que je voudrais dire rapidement sur ce point-là. Merci.
Thank you so much, Madame. Merci beaucoup. So very interesting points also raised, and I like how you mentioned that at the heart of legislation is a need for collaboration among countries, among regions, so that we can be able to implement what is decided. And also not just implement, but also implement what is the need or the voice of the population that we seek to serve. So very important points there mentioned to be able to contain what we are trying to grasp as a continent, which is emerging technologies. Thank you so much. Now to Alhaji Abdul, on the same issue, your intervention on what legislation exists or what can happen to be able to contain emerging technologies and to ensure that they are an extension of our offline world.
First and foremost, I think we have to appreciate that disruptions due to emerging technologies in of themselves often impact the status quo. And the status quo does not like usually the impacts. Of course, if it's an impact to make them more money, they might be happy, but otherwise, the status quo doesn't like it. What we have seen in places across Africa, but Nigeria, for example, we've seen that banning does not work. Whether you're trying to ban Bitcoin, whether you are trying to ban Twitter, the truth of the matter is that our youth have moved on. They've gotten on with it. So also we found, whether it's the Great Chinese Firewall or other types of trying to block internet in other countries across Africa, we've seen in Cameroon, really walls don't work. People bypass walls very easily, whether it's the VPN or otherwise. And so the question then is, what do we do? And so what we need to do really is to focus on the value proposition. What are the value propositions we can bring out? And how do we optimize, possibly even maximize human agency, which is the capacity of the human being to take action? One of my personal challenges with a lot of our legislation through Africa, but again, very specifically in Nigeria,
Did we lose you, sir? I bet so. So while we wait for Alaji, we can hear you now.
Okay, Alaji has been. About the Act, where the national legislature really is trying to determine whether votes and counted should be electronically transmitted. And I think that these are issues that across Africa need to spend more time on, is the broad strategic picture and how the regulator to some of the what I would call strategic tactical, them, especially people here in civil society, through research, so that there is empirical data to help them see the impact of this legislation.
Okay, we've got to move on quickly because we are almost running out of time. So once Alaji comes in, there are many questions you could take in the chat and also to round up. So in 1 minute, Hilda, also share your thoughts on legislation. Then we'll move on to take 2 questions, and the rest can also be answered in the Q&A part. So quickly, and then we take some questions. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll try and do a minute. I think there are four main areas, and I'll try and summarize this. Data protection laws will remain important, regardless of the future of the continent. Data protection laws are going to remain important, and part of this is thinking through cross-border data flows and data localization. So, for example, I think in West Africa, the laws in Ghana create a provision requiring that, well, they don't restrict cross-border data flows. They do have provisions that actually protect, I think, like private data being processed in Ghana through outsourcing provisions. So that's a critical tool or way that the government is protecting other, I guess, like data mining and the immoral use of citizen data. We also have to think about competition and antitrust laws. We think Africa has a really booming digital marketplace. And when you think of like the traditional antitrust and competition laws, these are not necessarily suitable for the digital economy. So we have to think about how do we change some of these laws to actually make them more applicable to the digital marketplace, particularly when you consider that a lot of the digital entrepreneurs are actually working more in the low and middle end of the spectrums, and yet you're opening up the continent to more of a global marketplace. And then the other one that I think I would also emphasize on that is leveraging, I guess, the existence of regional market bodies. When you think of digital technologies, a digital economy, because what you typically find is that no country will have the kind of resources that they would need to effectively be able to regulate, emerging technologies. But if you're able to do this within within a shared system of resources, leveraging existing regional market bodies like COMESA or others, and we're able to share some kind of resources and regulatory structures and have them applied across border, it actually makes more of a seamless marketplace.
Amazing. Thank you so much for highlighting the need to leverage regional markets in legislation, and also focusing on strategy and tactics, riding on data, like also Alaji has mentioned. So very important. So I'm going to read out a question from the chat. And then Madam Mary also has her hand up. So I'll just read the one in the chat quickly, and then we have Madam Mary. So the first one is from Alice Ochana Lawrence, and she says that cyber attacks is said to have risen by 600% since the COVID-19 pandemic from available statistics. Mrs. Alade mentioned cybersecurity literacy across board for all as recommendation. My question is, will literacy alone be sufficient without some form of laws or regulation that deal with perpetrators of this heinous crime? Social engineering and malware attacks are rising by the second. Is cybersecurity literacy for users of digital services alone enough? So that's a question, and any of the panel members can take it. And since you're already here, Hilda, maybe you want to take this. Is literacy enough for combating issues around cybersecurity, or what more needs to be done? I think Alaji is back. He also takes that. And the next question will go to Madam Gertrude.
Yeah, I would definitely say that it's not enough to just have literacy or awareness creation campaigns on these laws. I think we need to have a system of accountability measures. Well, I mean, where does the buck stop? I think every time there's like a huge data breach, your data has been stolen, but how do you target, right? What is the system of redress that exists for you if your data has been used by someone else without your consent? I think of, I'll probably give this example because we all use, I think a fair majority of us use Facebook, for example. And so every time we log in, there are numerous advertisements or commercials within your news feed, and it's up to you to go into the system to try and remove yourself from systems that are actually using, whether it's tracking your internet, your browsing history, your preferences. So there's a lot of information about you that is being harnessed. By these social media engines and being sold to other people or entrepreneurs within the marketplace, and then they're actually now sending you targeted advertisements with things that you did not even ask for. In such a system, if I decided I want to sue Facebook or any other company, do the laws actually protect me, and do the laws allow me to get some form of either compensation or to just what is the system of accountability? So I think our laws need to be comprehensive enough to be able to protect how your data is collected, but more than that, to think through how your data is used with or without your consent.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Alaji, I see you are here. Would you also want to add your voice to the question?
Yes, I would.
Enough?
First of all, policy, legislation, and regulation are secondary. They are extremely important, but they are after the fact. Literacy, cybersecurity culture, cybersecurity hygiene, which means updating your systems, making sure that you have an antivirus, firewall, etc. These are before prevention. And I think, as we all know, prevention is better than cure. So I would say that they go hand in hand, but certainly you need to lock the door of your house before you can complain the house has been broken into. And I think we need to also focus on prevention aspect. So that would be awareness, culture, and hygiene.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Alaji. And now we have the last question going to Madam Gertrude Kohn. So somebody is asking, what do emerging technologies mean to the layperson who is probably not in tech? What do emerging technologies mean to these people?
Le citoyen lambda, pour lui, ce n'est pas question de technologie. Lui, ce qui l'intéresse, c'est comment avoir une meilleure vie. Donc, les technologies, c'est juste un moyen pour lui. Mais ce sont les usages, ce sont les services qui en découlent, qui sont importants pour le citoyen lambda. Donc, lui parler de blockchain, lui parler de IoT, lui parler, c'est bien. Mais lui, ce qui l'intéresse, c'est comment faire pour savoir que ses enfants sont en sécurité, comment s'assurer à distance que les enfants sont en sécurité. C'est en ce sens-là qu'il peut s'approprier les nouvelles technologies. Si on résout un problème qu'il a, oui, il va s'intéresser aux nouvelles technologies. Mais si on vient lui présenter les technologies, oui, c'est intéressant, oui, c'est pour les riches, oui, c'est pour ceci. Mais à partir du moment où ça résout un problème de santé, un problème de droit, un problème d'éducation, un problème de sécurité, oui, il va être intéressé. Et oui, il faut des législations, mais il faut aussi informer, il faut éduquer, il faut sensibiliser, il faut former. Et je reprends l'exemple du docteur tout à l'heure qui a dit, avant de dire au voleur de ne pas entrer, il faut déjà mettre une serrure à sa porte. Oui, il faut mettre une serrure à sa porte, mais il faut aussi il faut connaître le type de serrure, il faut être formé pour savoir qu'il faut une serrure déjà, quand on veut mettre à sa porte, il faut savoir comment sécuriser ses acquis. Donc, on a besoin des nouvelles technologies, mais avant tout, il faut que ces technologies répondent à des besoins qui ont été identifiés et des besoins pour faciliter la vie du citoyen et la vie des entreprises aussi. Merci.
Amazing, merci beaucoup. So we are rounding up quickly, and so this is a massive thank you to all speakers for sharing with us very insightful points. And actually, my key take-homes are a lot. Those that stood up for me about collaboration in the space, effective multi-stakeholder representation with governments at the front also, and not playing to do the catch-up game, and not wanting to do only the catch-up game. Also, capacity building. Just so I repeat what Alaji said. It says that Africans are those who can make Africa great, right? And also more about capacity building and building with the underserved, underrepresented, and unborn in mind. And so for anybody who joined at the latter part of our conversation, we're discussing emerging technologies. And we've gathered from this session that Africa is not left behind. We are bracing ourselves for these technologies. There's legislative work ongoing, there's capacity building, but there's more to be done. And so it requires that everybody's efforts is redoubled in this space. And together we can make Africa also one of the very strong voices and makers and innovators in emerging technologies. Thank you so much. I would entreat all speakers, if you're still around, to kindly go to the chat, the Q&A session, and reply to some of the responses there. Also, if you have any of your presentations you want to share with us to be uploaded to our website, we welcome them gladly. And thank you, everyone. Merci beaucoup. Salut.